Welcome to the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. I'm Sean Aylmer. Australian farmers are already some of the most tech-savvy, innovative operators you'll come across. I've spoken about this before, about how they embrace new technology and new ways of operating to help run their businesses more efficiently. Now, a group of landowners and farmers are banding together to make the most of a new market in agriculture, the carbon market. Rohan Clarke is one of the founders of Regen Farmers Mutual. Rohan, welcome to Fear and Greed.
Thanks, Sean. Pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Not at all. Now, tell me, how does Regen work? Explain it to me.
Well, at its simplest, what the Regen Farmers Mutual is doing is enabling farmers to come together to create their own farmer-owned infrastructure to enable them to engage in environmental markets so they can retain more value and more control.
Okay, so bringing farmers together, presumably these aren't the very big farms. These are kind of the next level down. Is that right?
100%. The bigger guys can look after themselves, but it's the non-corporate farmer who really can't access these markets currently because of the way that the market failure that exists. And so by coming together and creating their own institutional entity that they control, they can then better engage in the market.
Okay, and so exactly what is the market you're talking about?
Well, to begin with, it's carbon and biodiversity, but the carbon market was all of 220 million last year, and it's expected that the market's going to grow to 10 to 24 billion, according to the Carbon Market Institute, by 2030. So the market's growing in size and in types. So biodiversity, flood resilience, drought resilience, these are all emerging environmental markets.
Okay, you're going to have to break this down for me because I'm talking about something I know very little about. When you're talking 10 to 24, these are carbon offsets potentially? Is that what we're measuring?
Carbon offsets, but the way the market's growing, it's buyers are looking for more than just carbon offsets. They're looking for a story that goes with it. So they might be looking for biodiversity to go along with it, or they might be looking for whole of farm outcomes, that they know that animal welfare is being looked after on farm. So these other kind of benefits, they're called co-benefits, are getting bundled into carbon markets so that when a farmer enters into a transaction, they're actually selling more than just carbon. They're overall land management practices.
Okay, so who are they selling that to? The land management practices, biodiversity, carbon credits effectively. Who are they actually selling that to?
Good question. So up until now, the carbon market has been dominated by government. So the Commonwealth government in particular, through the Emissions Reduction Fund. So they bought 95% of all carbon last year in Australia. The world's changing though, as consumers and employees of large companies demand that more responsible actions, I guess, with respect to how we treat our environment. So there's this wall of interest and demand coming from non-government buyers, corporates, institutions with respect to carbon offsets, but also biodiversity protection. And as I say, Coles, for example, or Woolies, they recognise that their consumers have difficulty with the abstract concept of a carbon credit, but they understand that, yes, if you're doing good on your farm, that's something we can sell to our consumers.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. I mean, we don't talk about emissions trading schemes or things like that in Australia anymore, though perhaps we should. But I mean, in a sense, it's that by stealth in a way.
Agreed, yes. I mean, and the government, the federal government, for example, really wants to see the market grow beyond them being the only buyer in the market. So they've got initiatives underway to kind of promote that. But we see that farmers coming together to create their own entity and create that institutional kind of structure as being a really catalytic factor that helps to kind of unlock this market.
Okay, so what are the opportunities for the farmers and the landowners here?
Well, it really depends on the size and location of your land, of course. So, a property in Byron Bay is going to look very different to a property in Holbrook, and with respect to the things that, one, they're farming or the way that they're using their land, and two, the actual landscape itself. So there may be, depending on your land, it may be that by planting trees you can access standing carbon or carbon offset markets. But it may be that a farmer can simply get financed into creating a biodiversity zone around their dam, for example, and the ANU Sustainable Farms have done some great work around that. The benefits that can be created through investing in your dam, basically, and we can see that there's ways that the environmental markets, for example, can finance farmers to do that type of thing on farms.
Okay, so sort of the bottom line really is hopefully it makes money for farmers, be that in the short term by effectively selling carbon offsets, or the long term by investing in biodiversity and increasing output on the farm.
Absolutely, absolutely. In some senses, the environmental markets are a transition because what we can see that, like in 5 to 10 years' time, every farmer in Australia is going to be held accountable for their farming practices, and that they'll be held accountable effectively through their produce. So that's the difference between a free-range egg and a barn-laid egg. There'll be price difference, and the way that you're held accountable is through your land management practices as captured in your data. And so we see that, like, again, this idea of creating a farmer-owned vehicle that can control, own the digital platform that enables the management of that data, that demonstrates good practice, is going to be path critical because there'll be 3 or 4 major players, and we think a farmer-owned one should be one of them.
Stay with me, Rohan. We'll be back in a minute. I'm speaking to Rohan Clarke from Regen Farmers Mutual. Okay, so there's obviously going to be a big digital component here. You're talking about data there. And, the further we go down this path, the more important data is for people to be accountable on both sides of the transaction. How much of what you're doing is focused on that digital component?
It's quite strong. There's 2 major parts that we're doing, but data is key, as we've just discussed, because data is what ultimately proves that a farmer's doing good on farm. It's through that data.
Yeah.
So that's why we see it's key, and it's key that farmers have control of that, which under existing systems, farmers tend to be, or we all tend to get platformed and our data disappears and is managed by someone else. So it is key. But the other part to it is that the mutual itself is a farmer-owned broker. And so it helps to educate farmers and then take them through the process whereby they can access these markets, whether it's through green provenance markets or through carbon markets. And so a key part standing here today is farmers look at it and there's a dizzying array of kind of like information coming their way.
Yeah.
So a key part of creating a farmer-owned mutual is to provide the mechanisms to enable farmers to kind of easily learn what it is that this market's about, and then over time understand what the opportunities are for them actually to engage in the market.
Okay, now I've discussed farming before, and the farmers I know kind of from where I grew up, they're incredibly savvy. I mean, they're intelligent, but they're just savvy. And I don't know whether they're sitting on their headers at the moment. Hopefully the rain stopped and they're, sitting on their headers thinking about this sort of stuff. How many are actually involved? Like, there must be a huge market of farmers who could become involved in this. What's the take-up like at the moment?
This process started about 18 months ago, and it started under the federal government's cooperative farming program. We ran 3 series of co-design workshops. It was like 12 in total, I think. And through that process, we had 80 farmers and government organisations and conservationists come together to kind of understand the problem and then ultimately design what has become the mutual. So that kind of was the start of the process. When you look at what this thing is, you'll see written into the principles of the Constitution, it's actually embedded that's farmer-owned and led. And so then in terms of the mutual itself was created in July, but it's not being launched till next year. But in anticipation of the launch, we've created a waiting list for its onboarding product, which enables farmers to get that first understanding of what the opportunities are on their farm.
Yeah.
Anyway, that was a long-winded way of saying there's a wait list for that product. We opened about 6 weeks ago, and there's 260 farmers on that. With 2, 3, 4 farmers join a day. We're not talking to anyone about it currently. So that's indicative that there's demand. We have also relationships with the like of AgForce in Queensland, Landcare Vic and Landcare New South Wales, Landcare Networks. And so it's through those mechanisms that we'll be actually engaging farmers on the ground, because the idea is it's a distributed organisation. It uses existing farmer organisations to engage with farmers on the ground.
Rohan, you were an investment banker, I believe, and now you've ended up here. How did you end up this is great. I'm loving this. I love talking to people that I'm learning stuff from and being educated. So I'm very enthusiastic about this. But how did you go from investment banking to this?
I fell out of love of investment banking around about 2007. I went through that.
You weren't on your own back then. You weren't on your own back then, I got to say.
Yeah, and so I had 20 odd years setting up a commodity desk. Started the corporate finance division, worked in the boutique investment bank that was sold to Lehman Brothers. I entered a journey where that was how I ended up working in the mutual and cooperative sector, because I was really particularly interested in understanding how stakeholders could have a real stake in their business. And so I've done a lot of work in that space, worked with the peak body and worked on farmer data co-ops for quite some time with likes of Birchip Cropping Group. In addition to that, I was providing advice to Trust for Nature with respect to conservation finance, so looking at how to expand markets beyond carbon. And through that mechanism, this idea kind of came to the fore. I've got a good mate who's the co-founder of Regen Farmers Mutual. He has a regen farming background. And between us, we had this conversation and this realisation that there was potentially a real need and opportunity to create this Regen Farmers Mutual. So that's the genesis of the idea, really.
Yeah.
The coming together of various backgrounds.
Well, Rohan, good luck with it, and thank you for talking to Fear and Greed.
Thank you very much, Sean.
That was Rohan Clarke, one of the founders of Regen Farmers Mutual and the managing director of Regen Digital. This is the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. Join me every morning for the full Fear and Greed podcast with all the business news you need to know. I'm Sean Aylmer. Enjoy your day.